Okay, so
Oh,
looks like we could get started. My name is Jamila Fines. I'm one of the executive members of the New York City Black Women's Political Club, and Count All Queens is an initiative that we've been working on for a few months to get Black women to mobilize their communities. But this one of the main reasons why we've been doing this is because Natasha Williams, who is our founder, helped to bring all of us together. She has done a lot of organizing in the past within her few years on this earth. She used to work with Women's March, did a lot of organizing on Washington. She's done a lot nationally and some work internationally as well. And Natasha Williams. Natasha?
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Jamila. I'll be very quick because I'm not the experts, and I think it's more important for the experts to speak. Thank you all for joining our Zoom chat, our e-version of Count All Queens. We had anticipated doing this in 3 more boroughs, but of course, as we all know, we are dealing with a public health crisis and needed to switch gears. So thank you all for joining in. Thank you to the Facebook listeners. If you are logged into the actual Zoom link, when we get to the Q&A section, please feel free to ask any questions. If you are listening on Facebook Live, we will also be fielding those questions as well. And with that, thank you again. And just really want to thank the panelists who have been rocking out with us since the very first one. I know I certainly learn something new every single time we have this event. So thank you for taking time out of your quarantine to join this call. And Dr. Grant, kicking it back to you.
thank you so much, and welcome everyone who is joining in this wonderful opportunity to connect. We might be socially distant, but spiritually connected, as the wonderful governor of New York State has coined the opportunity for us to still be able to have these moments where we can reach out and touch and still know that through connectivity in a different way, we'll be able to get through what we're having and witnessing in our world. So I'm going to just give Jamila a chance. She had planned a little introduction. I don't want to steal that from her, but I want you all to realize just what a hardworking member of the New York City Black Women's Political Club Jamila Fines is, and I'm going to give her a chance to let you know who else is joining us, and then we're going to jump into our discussion today.
So I am jumping back in. I want to first introduce Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant, the first voice and face that you guys have seen on your screens this evening. She is an international speaker. For those of you that do not know, she's also a best-selling author, and she is a celebrity MC. So I want to give some invisible hand claps for Dr. Grant. Also, we have Dr. Lori Daniel Favors Esquire. She's an author, an interim executive director and general counsel at the Center for Law and Justice, Social Justice at Medgar College. She does a lot of amazing work all throughout New York City and actually all throughout the country as well. And she's also a Sirius XM radio host, for those of you that do not know. So I know you've probably seen a lot of her around as well. We also have Nicole Yearwood, who is definitely no spring chicken. She is from the United States Census Bureau. She's a senior partnership specialist there, and she's done a lot of work all over the community. So she's extremely amazing, extremely passionate, and you will definitely see that come out when she speaks to you this evening. And last but not least, we have Melva M. Miller. She's the Executive Vice President at the Association for a Better New York. She's also been doing a lot of work with businesses in the community with the census. So definitely we look forward to hearing from her this evening. So I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Jamila. Thank you so much. And we're excited because we're counting all queens, but Jamila also has a young king that has been supporting us, her son, in getting us ready. And this is a new way forward for everybody having children and working and just being very tolerant of the fact that this is life. And when we have to be able to adjust in moments like this, it gives even our young ones a chance to learn by example what we're doing. So we're going to kick it off with our first speaker. I feel like she is the celebrity of Census because she's been everywhere talking to everyone who will listen about the importance of this historical context when you think about this United States Census this year, and particularly with COVID-19 and the fact that it's now online. And there's just so many things that she wants to share. She is the leading expert as a United States Census Bureau Senior Partnership Specialist, none other than the talented and beautiful Nicole Yearwood. Nicole, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I wasn't sure who you were introducing there for the moment, because I said that could be any one of the three of us in terms of all the work that we've been doing in communities for, I want to say, a little more than 2 years now, actually, around the census. So you could have been describing any of us. Melva and Laree have been working hard to make sure that our communities get the message. You know, right now we are in the middle of the count. People started receiving invitations March 12th. People have been responding online, by phone. Of course, the paper questionnaire, some people received that already. If you haven't received the paper questionnaire and you want one, it will be coming between April 8th and April 16th. You know, as everyone else, our operations have been impacted by COVID. Our field operations have been suspended until April 1st at this time. So we just really want to acknowledge all of the partners. This is my second webinar or virtual meeting today, a virtual event today. And so we really appreciate the fact that everyone has gotten creative with us and developed ways to still spread the census message, to still encourage online response at my2020census.gov, as well as the phone response. You know, we're still, you know, we're all kind of subjected to the local, state, and federal, you know, restrictions in terms of, you know, things like, you know, we all have to stay home. You know, there's nothing we can do about it, but we're working very hard at home. Some people say, you know, we've been working harder since we've been home, trying to work on the ways that we can help get this message out in these trying times. A lot of information is on our website. Last Friday, we did a full, our director did a full press avail regarding our operational changes as a result of COVID. Some of the key points is, like I said, 2 weeks to be suspended field operations for 2 weeks. In addition to that, we are actually adding about 2 weeks on to the response. So initially responses, we were scheduled to wrap up at the end of July. We are now going to August 14th with responses, online, by phone, and paper. So that process is still going on. We're going to start the non-response follow-up where we send census takers to go door to door. Instead of that starting in mid-May, that's going to begin at the end of May. So just we have details for college students. A lot of people were concerned about how they would be counted, and we're still moving forward with our group quarters operation. So if they were on campus, those students will still be counted on campus. Then it's not just because, you know, they're going home now due to the closure of schools and COVID, but we're still going to get that information from their institutions if they were on campus, sleeping on campus in the dorms. We also still want them to respond based on where they would have lived. And again, we have those resources at our website, 2020census.gov. So we are really just working hard, trying to pivot. We're sending messages to partners. We've been contacting partners just to speak to them, give them some updates on our operations. A lot of people have had questions. Anyone who has applied for a job and was contacted, we want you to know we'll still follow up with you regarding those positions. Just hold tight until we're up and running again. Those are the operational updates. Stacey, I think you're on mute, Stacey.
Yes, I just, I was talking and saying, yes, girl, but no one could hear me. So here we go. Hallelujah for the unmute button. So yes, thank you, Nicole, for sharing that information because it's important. A lot of people did have questions. They were looking for what to do if they were hired for a job. You know, how does this affect everyone being counted? Because we know this is very critical to how we are represented. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, you know,
and I was going to say, we
forward.
still need to, and we want to be, we're definitely working hard to be sensitive, but we still, anyone who can share, if you have social media, we're telling people, please share the link with your contacts, with your networks, letting them know they can respond online. Even our phone operation was impacted because, of course, we have to limit the number of staff who we would have had answering the phones. So we also need to make sure we do have the phone lines. They're a little bit backed up because of staffing, you know, staffing reductions as a result of COVID. The easiest way is for people to do it online. Phones, of course, are still an option. We still have 13 languages we're covering, as well as on our YouTube channel and website, we're covering approximately 63. So we still have those resources available, but we need people to bear with us, but we have to get this count done. It's still imperative. Call your friends, call your family members, contact your neighbors. Everyone is home, so there's no excuse. It just takes a few minutes to count everyone.
Exactly. And virtual round of applause to you, Nicole. Thank you for your tireless efforts in this work. And I am definitely going to introduce the next queen the same way when it comes to being the queen of just work in the community. I'm definitely biased because I get to work with her for years in many different capacities and ways, but I'm just so excited to introduce her in her latest capacity as the Executive Vice President at the Association for a Better New York. And one of the real roll up your sleeves, let's do this work together. Let's really make sure that our community gets this information and that we understand how important it is. So I'm so excited to introduce to some my sister from a spiritual mister, Ms. Melva Miller. Round of applause to you, sis.
Oh boy, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, my sister, Stacey NC Grant. As Nicole said, I almost felt like you could have been talking about any of us, any of the speakers today. And I am so happy, and I feel like I'm home. This is a conversation with some really powerful Black women who are doing work in the communities in and out of the census world. And I am truly honored to be in the presence of everyone on this call. So, you know, today, New York is facing unprecedented challenges coping with the global pandemic. And, you know, and I've been saying this, I've been on calls all week, and I wanted to remind people that, you know, our most pressing concerns, obviously, is the health and safety of our families, our friends, our communities, New York City. And we want to make sure that, you know, we keep our communities and our city strong. So for the immediate term, as you said earlier, Stacey, let's heed the message from the governor and the mayor to stay at home, let's stay safe, and practice social distancing. And that's the most important thing we can do. The second most important thing we can do is fill out our census form. And that's why we are here to talk about the census in our community. I have a quick deck that I'd like to share, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Let's see. Sorry. Okay. We can see, we're all good?
We're all good.
Okay. So why are we talking about this today, and why is it so important for our community to talk about the census? You know, we are at a risk of an undercount, most importantly because just the nature of sort of living in a city like New York, but also in the community that we live in. And being undercounted in the census in minority communities can cost us millions of dollars. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about this later because I know my sister Loree is going to jump all in on this. You know, about sort of checking Black. But one of the reasons why we should care and why we should participate in the census and check Black is because, you know, required for federal and state and tribal programs and are critical factors for basic research behind numerous programs and policies are based on race. And we don't want to lose that classification. You know, race data is used in many, many ways, like establishing guidelines and evaluations for affirmative action programs. It's used to monitor compliance with voting rights and civil rights acts. And it's really important that we know that in a community like ours in Southeast Queens, we have, you know, for the first time, the opportunity to not only check our race, but to check our ethnicity. So again, I know my girl Laree is gonna bring this home later, but you know, we love to talk about sort of what we're mixed with and all of our different cultures. But even if we have an eighth, make sure you check Black on that census form. And now more than ever, communities like ours need to stand up and participate and check Black on our census form. The other reason why we should care here in Southeast Queens is because we received about 50% of census funding programs based on the 2010 census. And if you look on the screen, you can see how certain communities responded, what our self-response rates were. If you look at South Jamaica, it's 54%, Hollis, 49%. You know, these are all deplorable self-response rates. And when you look at communities like Southeast Queens, you look at communities like Central Brooklyn, two clusters of communities of African-American descent and Afro-Caribbean descent, we are hovering around 50%. And we know if you get a 50% on a test, that means we fail. And 50% on census funded programs means 50% of resources in our communities. And this is one of the reasons why I am really involved in helping our communities create messaging around the census, is because we need to drive home the importance of why filling out the census is important. One of the ways ABNY has sort of stepped up in this is coming up with and helping our groups do strategic storytelling, right? So we know that if we want to create a comprehensive messaging campaign, we have to look at the 2010 data, right? So we know the communities that did poorly. We have to figure out why they did poorly. And there's been tons of research through focus groups and polling to find out exactly where the barriers and obstacles are. Then the next step is coming up with messaging to address those obstacles and barriers, right? So we know that the reasons why people have complicated relationships with government or why they're not filling out the census forms vary per community. And we have to figure out how to come up with storytelling and messaging to address that in different communities, right? So one of the things that ABNY has been doing is supporting in this with our community-based organizations around message customization. We're working on strategic planning with communities like ours that are vulnerable. We've been doing communication counseling, all really how do you tell the story, right? How do you create tailored narratives to illustrate the message of action so that people can relate to it? Because this census thing can be this abstract thing for many of us. We don't know what it means, right? We don't know how it affects our lives. So coming up with these stories and the strategic storytelling is extremely important. And doing that, we really need to come up with a main message, right? So, you know, what are we trying to say? That census funding brings billions of dollars to our community. But what does that mean? What is the supportive message, right? And then the story, the evidence or the anecdote that supports that supportive message, and then the call of action. So for instance, if we're talking about families and children, again, communities like ours, communities of color, we know that women are usually the caregivers in those families. We create stories around that. So we say school-based census funding is determined on how many people live in our community, right? And then we follow up with a specific supporting message, like PS 156 down the block doesn't have enough school seats, and that is school-related census funding. And then we say the call of action: complete your census form, so that we can get the amount of funding for that school that we need to support our families. And then another thing we've been talking about, you know, and really how to drive this home, especially dealing with COVID-19, is now that we know how to craft messaging to the communities that we are reaching out to, how do we communicate that, right? Now we have challenging times. We can't attend our church services on weekends. we're not in these public spaces, right? We have to pivot to digital engagement. So how do we use digital tools to communicate these messages again that resonate? And what we do is what we talk to our partners about how do you use these tools. We talk about using email campaigns. That's probably the simplest way that a lot of our community members communicate and know how to use is through email. Create simple email campaigns. Social media tools, right? How do you create relevant stories using social media platforms amongst the age groups that use different social media platforms? Because we know people receive information differently, right? We know that now the 50 and older group is using Facebook. We know that, Instagram is now sort of our age group, right? It's sort of the Gen X, I'm sorry. And now, TikTok is the thing amongst teenagers, but how do you make sure you're using your social media channels to target the right demographics and the right age group? And then also we talk about how to use social media channels to do earned social media. So for instance, when you're talking about the census and you're talking about a message that resonates with moms, make sure you're tagging all of your friends that are moms with school-age children so that they can see that message. And that's what we called earned social media, is making sure that you are tagging folks and folks are tagging you in their social media campaigns. The other thing I want to talk about is the importance of the census for businesses, because this gets lost a lot of times. And I think, again, I think Lorie's going to drive this home a little later when she talks about how changing communities often are in response to how businesses react to census data. But businesses use census data all the time to make decisions. And when we are in communities and we are looking for fresh groceries, or we're looking for various types of goods and services, right? These businesses are reacting. These businesses are making investments based on census data. We know that businesses use this data to make impactful decisions like where to relocate, where to build facilities. We know businesses use census data for marketing strategies and merchandising strategies. We know businesses look at labor markets, right? When they're looking to relocate or they're looking to locate in the community, they're looking at what does the workforce look like? And these are all the types of reasons why people should fill out their census form, is because businesses look at that data when they're making business decisions about coming into communities. And when you break it down per sector, you can see, right? For instance, supermarkets rely on census data to create new grocery stores in communities. I know in a community like mine, we've been looking for a Trader Joe's, right? We've been looking for a fresh produce for many years. And in the conversations we've had with those stores, they always refer to the census data. They look at educational attainment, they look at median income, they look at population size. We know big box stores use census data to know how to stock their stores. We know that the Target in Valley Stream stocks different merchandise than the Target in downtown Brooklyn based on census data. So all sectors use census data to make determinations on how they make investments in our community. And when we are fighting for equity, when we want to make sure that the business community is responsive to the community needs, this is one of the tools that can help us, is to show the data, right? What does the data show in terms of who lives here, in terms of age, race, ethnicity, and the like? Also, economic development projects, right, are based on census data, right? We know that federal, state, and local economic development initiatives in the public and private sector use census data to make billions of dollars of investments in communities. One major example is Hudson Yards, right? If you look at the rationale for why this development project invested billions of dollars in Midtown Manhattan, it was based on census data. And that project was shaped based on census data, right? It was responsive to who was moving in the community. So if we want to make sure that major real estate development is being invested in our communities in a way that is responsive to us, we want to make sure that we are participating. And then the last thing we do when we're talking about businesses and the census, we want to make sure that businesses understand that they should care about the census, not only because of their bottom line, but it's because it's an investment in the people who support them, right? And their customers, their clients, and their employees. Because if their employees or their customers are food insecure or housing insecure, they can't come to work, they can't spend money in their businesses, they can't patronize their business districts. So we want to make sure that the funding that we deserve based on the population data comes into our community so that we can support the people who live there, who can then support the businesses. So that is Census 2020 and the business community and the work that we're doing around messaging.
Wow, like that was so much that you shared, Melva. I'm like mind blown. Like if I could do one of those emojis, mind blown with seeing it, because when you can visually see it, and for those of you who are joining live, you can definitely appreciate and understand just the importance of this conversation, because a lot of people think the census is just some annoying, intrusion into their personal life. And what you are sharing is just how much this impacts everything that we do. Everywhere that we are affected with school and businesses and our houses, there's so much that's impacted by the census. And a thank you for that very comprehensive overview so that we could take a look at how we build a narrative within our own communities that we're sharing with our friends, our family members, especially those who might have immigrated to the United States and afraid of what the census means. You're able to now say, no, let me explain what this really impacts and how the census is protected from any of the other ICE challenges and all the other things that are going on. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure we're going to have some additional questions when we go into our discussion with all three of you, but I want everyone's mind to remain engaged and jot down your questions. You can put them in the chat, you can put them online so that we can get to them, but we're not done yet. I introduced Queen 1, 2, and they're not in any order, but the next queen that I get to introduce to you right now is another individual who has been on the front line, queen of this work, author and interim executive director and general counsel for the Center for Law and Justice, and a Sirius XM radio host. So somewhere along the lines, Lurie Daniel Favors loves to talk, Esquire. So clearly that's why she is an attorney and loves to litigate a few points here and there. And we just appreciate her spirit and just the joy in which you approach this work and do this work. And I'm going to get your presentation queued up as well, because you have some additional information to add to what our two sisters have been able to share with us. And we are excited that the audience today, digital, when Melva mentioned the digital platform, this is really important because now you can share this broadcast over and over again on your pages. You can let everyone in your community not just talk about dances on TikTok with their children or friends, but how the census is going to TikTok us if we don't get counted, and how important this is. So without further ado, Lurie Daniel Favors, Esquire, over to you.
Thank you so much. Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. I want to just first thank you all for assembling this moment. And yes, the other two queens presented before me, I definitely consider them my sisters in the census. There's a very small and elite club of Black women who have been doing this work for this census cycle over the course of the past several years. And so I thank Nikki and Melva. It's such a joy to be able to connect with you guys virtually. I'm going to ask you if you could advance the slides, Doc, because as you know, my computer and not been connecting so well today. But what Melva and Nikki were really talking about was the fact that the census is charged with the distribution of political power and the money that funds what happens in our communities. And I want to make a point really briefly, because I've often had people say to me, well, the government sends me a check every 2 weeks, or the government pays for my this or pays for my that. They know who I am. They know where I'm at. They don't need the census to get me involved or to know how much money I need. And the reality is that the government is restricted by the Constitution to use census data for the distribution of money and political power. Now, it would be great if the government could say everyone who's on payroll, everyone who uses WIC, everyone who uses SNAP or affordable housing programs. We know that they're there. We can kind of count who they are. We can just go ahead and fund them accordingly. The reality is that there are rules to the systems that govern how we get access to political power and how we get access to resources. And communities of African descent have traditionally been excluded from those systems because of a lack of knowledge. And for those of you who were raised in the Christian tradition, you know that the good book says that my people are destroyed for what? A lack of knowledge. And so what we are really trying to do with this census campaign is to ensure that our communities are getting access to information in a way that makes sense for them. So you can go to the next slide, please. Now, what's important for people to realize is that what we're experiencing right now with COVID-19 and the coronavirus really is an outgrowth of our lack of participation at the past census cycle. But hospitals, healthcare, the distribution of resources, the distribution of nurses and doctors and medical beds, all of these things are tied in some way to population count. And in 2010, most of us who are living in communities of African descent did not show up on the census and full representation. Some of our communities had 20, 30, maybe 40, maybe 50% of census activity, which means that our communities were undercounted and underreported. What happens then is when you, as your population, if your population is not counted, when they plug in total population counts for all of the programs that our communities rely on, if your community is not showing up 100%, you're only going to get 20, 30, 40, maybe 50% of what you're entitled to when it comes to resources. Right now, I just saw an article that talked about the fact that communities of African descent in central Brooklyn, South Brooklyn are the ones that are representing some of the greatest increases in the rates of people who are contracting or testing positive for the coronavirus. These are also communities that have some of the least access to medical care and adequate healthcare systems and programs that are going to be able to ensure that they're able to be maintained in a safe manner. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to think about is how does this pandemic and how does what we're experiencing right now really impact our communities? And the reality is that we are dealing in 2020 with the census results that we had in 2010, because we are locked into those formulas. We are locked into that distribution for the next 10 years following every census cycle. Next slide, please. One of the things I like to always do is to introduce people to the family I call the Jackson family. And this is a family that many of you who have heard me talk before may know before. You can go to the next slide, because the Jackson family actually lives, like many of us, in central Brooklyn, in South Bronx, in Jamaica, Queens, in Harlem, New York, in the North Shore of Staten Island. And the Jackson family, like many of our families, live in what's called hard to count communities. And if you look at this map to my right, perhaps depending on where you're at on the screen, your left, everywhere where you see red is considered a hard to count community, which means those communities had very, very low self-response census rates. And again, because the census takes total population count and just plugs it into formulas, it's very mathematic. A lot of times we act like there's some wizard behind the curtain who's manipulating things, and sometimes there is. But in this case, it really is just a matter of math and numbers. And when your numbers don't support the investment in schools, when your number of the population don't support the investment in healthcare, when they don't support the investment in affordable housing, you end up in a community that is underfunded, under-resourced, and under-politically represented for 10-year blocks of time at a time. Next slide, please. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Avengers. I don't know if it's because I have a 13-year-old child. I'm not sure why. And he and I just like superhero movies. But when Thanos snaps his finger, after he gathers all the Infinity Stones, and he snaps his finger, you can go to the next slide, we basically see half the galaxy disappear. So what happens when we don't show up on the census, when our communities don't fill out that census form, and when we don't have a total population count, it's literally as though someone snaps their fingers, and for the sake of the census and for the sake of funding and political power, we are essentially disappeared, which means our healthcare disappears, our schools disappear. I often give an example. If you live in a community, let's say a hypothetical community called Wakandaville, and in Wakandaville, there are 100 families, and those 100 families each have one child. And according to the census formulas for that year, children who live in a community like Wakandaville should get $100 each in education funding. Well, if only 40 of those families fill out the census, that means the community of Wakandaville is only going to get enough funding for schools for 40 children. But in September, when all 100 children show up to take the census, they have to then be educated on a budget that is only appropriately counting for 40 actual children. Next slide, please. So, and you can actually hit the toggle button another 2 or 3 times until we get to the lovely Destiny's Child. There we go. So this is the Jackson family. And they are a beautiful family. They have family with many generations of beautiful queens. As you can see, they've got grandparents, they've got parents with children, and they've got the aunties. And all of these folks live in the same building. Like many of us, they live in a multi-generational building. They have extended family living with them, literally 3 apartments in one brownstone. But what happens is this family is, as Melvin noted, really entrapped by the history and the lack of knowledge that comes with why it is we're filling out the census in the first place. Because of the historical fears that this family has, and those historical fears, quite frankly, are valid. This community, this family does not want to give information to the government. This community and this family does not trust the government. They may not understand how the census works. They may not have any idea as to why it is that the government is asking them for this information in the first place. The fear that they may have over giving that information is quite valid, because again, we just celebrate, what is this, 2020? Last year, we celebrated 2019. It was the 400-year commemoration of the introduction of enslaved Africans into this country. And 400 years ago, on the continent of Africa, when strangers showed up asking for information about your family and who you were, that evening, you might end up in the bottom of a slave ship. Your entire village might be entrapped. 200 years ago, during the enslavement of African people in this country, someone comes looking at you and looking at your family, half your family might be sold to another plantation. You might not ever have access to them. Just this, going back into this decade, when someone shows up at your door talking about, we need to find out who's in your household, it may be the police talking about your child fit a description. So we have generation after generation after generation of people who are validly and justifiably fearful of giving over information to the government. However, what we have to do is not be entrapped by that history. We have to use that history to inform how we operate now so that we can move our communities forward. Can you go to the next slide, please? What typically happens as a result of that fear is we end up with a 20, 30, 40% census response rate. And what does that mean? That means that if only 20 out of 100 people in your community fill out the census, you're going to get 20 cents on the dollar for every single service that you are entitled to. That means 20 cents on the dollar for healthcare, for SNAP, for schools and teachers, for transportation. You know, my children often used to ask me, Mommy, how come the subway stations in downtown Brooklyn and in the west side of Manhattan look beautiful? That it's like an artist came in and did a wonderful tile mosaic. It's amazing. And the train stations in East New York and in Bedford-Stuyvesant smell like urine and have trash all over them. Why is that? And I had to explain to them that the people on the Upper West Side, the people in downtown Brooklyn understand how to manipulate the systems that determine how to distribute the dollars so that their transportation systems are upheld. When I'm walking on the Upper West Side, or in very ritzy parts of New York City, I can guarantee you that every single intersection I come to, 9 times out of 10 is going to have a garbage can on each corner of every single intersection. Why? Because trash cans are in part funded by the dollars that are tied to census, which explains why when I'm walking through Black communities that may have only had a 20% census response rate, I might have to walk 4 or 5 blocks before I find a trash can where I can dispose of my garbage. So I have to explain to my children, no, it's not that Black people are inherently unclean. We are quite very clean. Thank you very much. We believe in using soap and washcloths. But it's not that we are not clean. It's that we don't understand how the systems that literally fund the infrastructure for us to be able to have access to trash cans, how that is tied to our census count. And so when we don't understand these things, it seems as though sometimes we need to go out and protest and burn down Babylon. And let me tell you, I am a fan of protest. I am a fan and a great believer that sometimes you may have to act in ways that are determined to burn down Babylon. But sometimes it's just the lack of our understanding about how these systems work. Sometimes we don't need to protest. We need to understand how to manipulate the systems that distribute the power within our community so that we can better turn those resources towards who we are. Can you hit the next slide, please? You can actually hit it about 4 or 5 times. So all these beautiful images of horrific communities show up. This is what a 20% census response rate will get you, right? When you live in a community that has a 20% census response rate, your schools are going to look like you only got funded at 20 cents on the dollar. Your grocery stores are going to be the corner bodegas, and not the well-lit bodegas, but the bodegas that look like you don't even want to walk inside because you don't know if you're going to actually walk out with everything that you came in with. When we have a 20% census response rate, you're going to go to playgrounds that are rusty, dusty, and busty. Your children are going to be sliding on slides that are not safe. They're going to be swinging on swings that are broke down. And they're not even going to have access to soft sand to fall on. They're going to fall on hard concrete, which is going to be really symbolic and metaphoric for how this city and this community really sees them. Your transportation communities are going to look like they funded for 20 cents. Your hospitals and your healthcare options, which is vitally important right now, are going to look like they were funded at 20%. When we're talking about availability of personal protective equipment and ventilators, who do you think is going to get access to those systems and those resources first? The communities that have 100% census response rates that will justify the investment of dollars into them. Who do you think is going to get them last? Us. When we're talking about healthy food and a 20% census response rate, that pizza, burger, and French fries, we can have all the McDonald's chicken sandwich availability, but we don't have access to healthy food. That's what happens when you only have a 20% census response rate. And I'm sticking on 20% right now because we just got the new numbers for the daily response rate that we have received so far in the New York City area. And whereas states like Minnesota are at a 30, 40% response rate, New York City is at a solid 20, 21%. I'm not even gonna break down for you what's happening in Brooklyn right now. So we need people that when Melva and when Nikki said, go online and fill out that, you home? What else you got to do? Fill out the census and make sure our communities are gonna get counted. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, this slide for me is really particularly important. You can actually hit that about 3 times. This slide is important because it really is important for us to see the difference in how other communities operate. Because this is a community, the Johnson community, you can hit it one more time. This Johnson community, this family, they are just like us. Actually, you can go back, I'm sorry. This family is just like our family, the Jacksons. They live in a multi-family building. They also have 3 generations living in that building. They've got grandparents. They've got parents with children. They've got aunties who also live in the building. Now, this is a family that does not share the same history as the Jacksons. This is a family that knows that, you know, a couple hundred years ago, whereas we were hiding out from the Klan, or not even the Klan yet, we were hiding out from slave patrollers a couple hundred years ago. A couple hundred years ago, this was a family that the government said, hey, listen, we just cleared all the Native American and indigenous communities out of your way. We got a whole bunch of open land out west because we just massacred a whole bunch of people. But what you can do, Johnson family, you can take your lovely family, you can go out west, you can have 5 acres, you can build a house, you can set up a farm. We're going to turn you into landowners and homeowners darn near overnight. That's what happened to the Johnson family. The Johnson family, when their grandfather came back from the war, he wasn't redlined into ghettos and not allowed to use his mortgage benefits. He wasn't forbidden from entering the college and not allowed to use his GI Bill. So this family knows when the government asks the Johnsons for information, the Johnsons are happy to give it over because their cultural orientation is one that says, I recognize that this is a government that has systems. And when I understand how these systems work, my community can benefit. So this is a family, you can go to the next slide, please. This is a family that might live in a 95% census response community, which means they're gonna get 95% of the political representatives. They're gonna get 95% of the healthcare options, the SNAP and the WIC, and don't be fooled, the Johnsons do live in communities where people use SNAP and WIC. I know people like to act like we're the only ones that use these programs, but that is not the case. They're going to get 95% of the transportation, which explains why they have mosaics and we have the smell of urine in our subways. They're going to get 95% of the healthy food options, which explains why Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, and the co-ops will be housed in their communities. And we barely get bodegas that are open 24 hours that might have produce, but the produce is so old and spoiled, it looked like it was the last produce that got off the truck on a very long ride from a very far away distribution center. So when we're thinking about the struggles in our community, think about what would happen if your community had been funded at 80%, at 90%, at 100% instead of 20. Think about the equity that you would be able to demonstrate and manifest within your communities if you had a fully funded system of resources in your community, as opposed to scrapping by and trying to get by as best you can. Next slide, please. And when you think about that and you compare that from what we had at the Jacksons to what they have at the Johnsons, no wonder they got schools that have 12 students to 2 teacher ratios plus a para. No wonder they have access to healthy food options, because in their school, they can afford to grow their own food. Why? Because they got teachers in abundance. They've got fruit in abundance. They've got vegetables in abundance. They have playgrounds where when their children fall, they fall on sand. They don't fall on hard concrete. They are cushioned and they are cared for. Their hospitals and the hospitals that shut down are going to be the last ones to shut down are going to be the ones in their communities. Why? Because they have the population numbers to justify the investment. Next slide, please. So it's important that we're clear that, again, sometimes it really is not about us having to go to take it to the streets. Now, there are many times when taking it to the streets, as I said, is appropriate, but sometimes we just have to understand how these systems work. And when we're talking about systems, one of the things we have to be clear about is racial protected categories, because not everything, and it's important. Let me actually back up. There is an opportunity for people of African descent on the 2020 census to be able to identify both by race and nationality, right? This is important because typically what has happened is you had to choose between race and nationality. Now, I want to just be very clear. A lot of Black people believe they have Indian in their family. A lot of Black people take 23andMe and find out they got 11 things that they could claim in their racial heritage, and they're very proud about that. We still have within our community some struggles with accepting that we are Black, that we are people of African descent. Now, that may not be anybody on this call, but I know at least one or two of y'all have people in your family who would prefer to be mixed, who might prefer to be other, who might prefer to identify as multiracial. What I like to tell people is this: listen, however you feel inside about racial categories and the history of race in this country, that is up to you. I am not here to convince you that being Black is something of which you should be proud of, though trust me, sis, you definitely should be proud. However, Black in this country is considered a protected racial category. So when you have an opportunity to fill out the census, and all of you do, you need to check Black for race, and then you can write in whatever you need to write in. And I'm also saying this because we have a very Pan-African community, particularly in New York City. We have people from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, everywhere you can think of where Black people have laid foot, traveled, picked up root, laid down plans, built societies. We are represented here in the city of New York. Now, I know that when you sit down at a Jamaican table, and I know this because my mother's Jamaican, when you sit down at a Jamaican table, at a Caribbean table, and the topic of Black people comes up, there might be some interesting responses to the term. I know that when you sit down at a Nigerian or a Ghanaian table and the topic of Black people comes up, there might be some interesting responses to the term. And sometimes those responses are proud. Oftentimes, let us be perfectly honest, they are not. We are not here to discuss the ways and the whys, although trust me, I do believe that is worth its own webinar. I will talk to the sisters of the political club about that at a later time. What is important is for us to recognize that in this country, Nigerian, Jamaican, Trinidadian, Ghanaian, those are nationalities. They are not race. Race has a particular framework in the United States of America. And when you do not check Black, you do not allow your community to have access to the benefits that come from civil rights protections, voting rights protections, and anti-discrimination protections. So while you may personally have very interesting feelings about the word Black, and let's be perfectly honest, there are Black Americans that have issues with the word Black, and that's okay. Again, the same message still applies. You must check Black on the census for the racial category if you are going to fully protect your community with anti-discrimination laws, voting rights and voter protections, and civil rights laws. So for the first time, you don't have to choose. If you are American and you trace your roots to the Deep South or to Illinois, wherever your people come from, you could write in American for nationality, and then you check Black. If you are Nigerian, you would write in Nigerian for nationality, and then you check Black for race. If you are Jamaican, if you are Puerto Rican, Dominican, and because we didn't even talk about the Afro-Latinx community in connection to this. If you are Mexican and you have an Afro-Mexican heritage, you write in Mexico for nationality, Dominican for nationality, and then you check Black for race. How we feel personally about these categories is not where we engage with the census. This is not a place for some moral quandary, for us to have some internal debate about, oh, well, I took my 23andMe, or I'm biracial, and my mom is white, and I really am not just fully Black. I should be able to be acclaimed, all things. Do that on your personal time. Get your flags, put your flags up against your wall, get your bumper stickers, come down on Eastern Parkway for Labor Day and jump up with the rest of us and wave every flag that you got in your 23andMe report. But on the census, check Black if you are going to be sure that you are able to protect our communities. And I think, although I have a few more slides, if you could actually just scroll on down to the one that says what we do next. These images here, gentrification, traffic, the inability to find a seat on the subway, all of these things are tied to census dollars. Our schools, the overcrowding that we experience, and you pause right there, actually, thank you. All of those things are tied to not having our community show up 100% on the census. I'm pausing on this particular slide about the citizenship question because there was a whole lot of effort that this administration put into trying to squeeze a citizenship question on the census. Why? Well, because this government was very clear, and this is not supposition. What I'm about to tell you is fact. This was established in court, okay? This administration was very clear that putting a citizenship question on the census was going to discourage Black and brown communities from participating, and it was going to inure to the benefit of white communities, not just white communities, white Republican communities. After extreme court battles here in New York, in the Southern District of New York, out in California, in Maryland, there were lawsuits filed left and right. We at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, we actually represented the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus as amici in the court case that appeared here in the Southern District of New York. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it was won with hard-fought legalese and experts who came in and determined and were able to establish that this question is a violation. It is going to inure to the harm of Black people and to the benefit benefit of white communities who tend to trend Republican. That question is no longer on the census, but most people do not know that, and they are fearful. So we need you to be able to go out and let them know, let communities know you do not have to worry about your citizenship being on the census. Your social security number is not going to be on the census. It is 10 simple questions. It will take you less than 10 minutes, and it will literally determine the distribution of money and political power for the next 10 years of your life. If you could go down 2 more slides, and then I will conclude. Just for the sake of time, I want to make sure we have time for questions. And thank you, Nikki, for putting the census questionnaire into the chat. It is so important that right now we, for the past 3 years, we have been preparing for this census. We had a campaign that, y'all, it was so amazing. We had street teams. We were going to every Black-owned barbershop, hair salon, and daycare center in all the 5 boroughs. And then the Rona came, and everything had to go another way. So now we are moving completely online. You have the ability to do this literally from the comfort of your home. And if you go down to the next slide, you will be able to visit our website, clsj.org/censusjustice. We have a whole host of information and materials there. We have digital items that you can download, that you will be able to access from your computer. You can email them. You can put them on your own website. We are getting ready to launch a Google form for organizations that are thinking about having your own census presentation. Perhaps you're a church and you've been streaming services, or you're a community-based organization and you have constituents and staff that you think need this information. We are happy to partner with you. We will provide Zoom presentations and interact with you, your congregants, your constituents, your staff, whomever your mama, your aunties, and your grandpapa, all of them. We are happy to do it because we have got to make sure that these numbers go up. We have got to make sure that our communities are counted. If you can go down to the final slide. And we also encourage you to really connect with us. We are at info@clsj.org. Of course, like many of us, our office is working completely remotely. So please do allow for time delays in response. But we are just so appreciative of this opportunity to be able to share this information with you. We have got to be far more sophisticated and educated about how the systems that determine the political resource distribution, the fiscal resource distribution, and the equitable distribution of each of those things are determining how we move and operate within our communities. And with that, I thank you very much.
Wow, I tell you, Lord, girl, I had to mute because I was on the floor rolling between the images from the Avengers and down to, I don't care how many flags you want to display on Eastern Parkway, check black. I don't know which one had me rolling more, but what another fully comprehensive overview of the topics that matter in our community. This Count All Queens broadcast is about understanding and identifying the fact that Black women run the world. And right. Because we do, we need to establish a place and space and opportunity for us to lead the charge for what is necessary for us to fill out our census form. So thank you for that. That was absolutely amazing. I know that we might have a few more questions, but I want all 3 of you to be back on while we highlight some of the key things that you shared. And the fact that the census is now online. There's no more door-to-door after all of the creative ways in which you all have empowered and activated communities. We really have to understand how much is at stake if we miss any of what all 3 of you shared, from Nicole opening up to Melva giving the additional stats to you rounding it out in a very personal way to the Black community, what's at stake. So let's start there. Let's start with this online opportunity to fill out the census that we're now faced with. What if people did not get their ID number in the mail? They're saying that they didn't get their census information yet, so they went online and it asked for an ID. They didn't get it, or it got lost in the mail, or the dog ate it. What should they do next to help make sure that the census is completed?
Hi, so that was so many great presentations. So what can you do? You can actually still fill out the census online without your 12-digit ID. There's 3 boxes that appear when you go to the website and you click on Start. And then right underneath, there's a link that says, I didn't receive my ID. And you can click on that link and you just need to input your address, your full address. That's all you need to do. And then you can proceed with completing the census online. So the ID is not required. And I actually posted the link in the chat to information on what to do if you don't receive it. We also have on our YouTube channel, we have videos that show people how to complete the census online.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. And then what about those who might not have computers or access to computers? Can they use their smartphones? As my Jamaican father would say, on an make the smartphone turn your dog. Can they use their phones
Yes.
to complete the census?
Yes, they can use the smartphone. So when we say online with the Census Bureau, with anything that we're doing, it's any device that connects to the internet. So you can use your smartphone, you can use a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, but definitely your smartphone. Absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. And Melva, I want to come over to you because in your presentation, you highlighted building the narrative, creating that message. What are some of the messages that we can share right now outside of everyone's anxiousness around COVID-19 rocking the planet? How can we pivot the conversation from the immediate challenges that we're all dealing with, but something that we can actually control, and that's filling out the census? What's a sample narrative that someone listening can share?
Yeah, well, I mean, a great narrative was everything that Loree just said. She is a great storyteller, and it's my sister and I love her and I want to compliment her. But when you tell a story that drives home with personal connection, that encourages people to take action. And that's what we're talking about, telling a story, telling a narrative. But when we're telling people right now, right, while you're at home, fill out your census form. It's safe, it's fast, it's easy, right? You can do it on the phone or you can do it online, right? When you want to make it more personal, we can say, and Nicole could probably talk about this better than I can, but there was a false social media post going around about if you fill out your census form, you will get your stimulus check in the mail, right? And although I love the creative narrative, right? I love that people are trying to make that connection. And the longer narrative is that, it is filling out the census form does make sure that your community gets the funding that you deserve. However, this stimulus package coming down because of Corona-19 is not directly related to you responding to the census.
Exactly. And let me just add, thank you for that, Melva. Okay, so, I mean, it's a great incentive, right? I've had people say, oh, wow, like this is going to happen. And they think, like it's exciting, it's great. But when we normally, really talk about the census, we hit on 3 key points. It's safe, it's easy, and it's important. And the safety piece speaks directly to the confidentiality and the privacy of the information that we're collecting. So if, in fact, it was true that you would get your stimulus check based on filling out the census, that would actually compromise the confidentiality of the data. The Census Bureau does not share information with any other city, state, federal agency, or authority. We are not allowed to use census data against you. So while that would have been a wonderful incentive, on its surface, it compromises our message of confidentiality. United States Code Title 13 is the law by which we are not allowed to share any information with any other entity.
I love it. Thank you, Nicole. And Loree, I tell you, all 3 of you and the information, like I know folks have other things to do, like go to either Club Bedrock or go to dinner in the dining room while we're all sheltering in. But Loree, you truly closed out the presentations with some data and some stats, because some people don't believe anything until they see some additional stats. And you put the Johnson family stat against the Jackson family stat. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that if people contact you, you could even share some of those stats that can go out on social media, that folks can see this is the result of filling out the census. It's not about, any sort of, as you said, someone behind a mirror or behind the curtain operating. It's real factual data. Numbers get funded. Numbers are what drives access to funding and opportunity. So I'm just curious, Loree, is there something that you could share or make a promise to create with some of those stats that can help build a narrative that we just heard again underscored by Melva?
So what we're actually, as we're now going fully digital with our street campaign to the interstreets, we're gonna make these presentations are gonna be made available. You'll be able to download them just like you can our materials, screenshot it. I think images work really well for people. We are often a very visual people. Screenshots of the images, and because when you see what a playground in a 95% census response community looks like versus the playground in a 20% census response community, it speaks for itself, you know. And it's funny because we are a brilliant community, and I actually had a gentleman who told me, he said, you know, I'm in my late 60s, I've got multiple degrees, advanced degrees, I've got several master's degrees. I mean, you know, he gave me he read off his resume, and he said, I've spent the past 5-6 decades hiding from the man. I never filled out the census. I was proud of ducking and dodging from the census. I didn't want nobody to know where I was. And now this is a very highly educated Black man, but the reality is we just got the right to register to vote in 1965 without facing lynch possibilities, right? So if you know somebody who's 56, 57 years or older, they're literally older than one of the pinnacles of integration. So, you know, it's not our fault we don't have this information. And that's why I so appreciate being able to work with Melva and Nikki and Farain, and just we could go down the list of all the people and Nan and all of you who put this together for the past several years, because our people, again, truly are destroyed just for lack of knowledge. It's not our fault we don't know, but I'm happy to load up whatever materials. I'll put, I had the full presentation. You can just have those couple of slides if you want. Don't make me no difference. Just let people know it's the Center for Law and Social Justice, please. But we are because we're all in this together. My community is not defined by those of us who have access to the best resources. My community are not defined by those of us who, you know, got the degrees and who have the jobs or whatever. Our community is defined by the state of our entire community. And so for us, and where we are positioned at the Center for Law and Social Justice, our commitment and our desire is to ensure our people are empowered, not the individuals who know how to manipulate the system, but that our people are empowered with the knowledge that they need so that we can funnel the resources to ourselves collectively. So yes, clsj.org. Please continue to follow. We're updating because, again, we done went from going up to giving people train cards to go to the Bronx to giving people our access to email. But thank you. Please visit the website, clsj.org. There's a number of materials and resources there now, and more will continue to come.
Well, we appreciate
I just wanted
that.
to add in terms of resources, because one of the things I want to make clear, I'm telling people, use the Google machine. The Census Bureau also has a bunch of resources on its website, but if you simply Google the census and federal funding, there are tons of articles and information that will appear that outline exactly how the census is related to federal funding, to our communities, to all the programs that we mentioned. But I just want to add, you know, unemployment insurance, which is part of the conversation around COVID. Like, you know, I'm watching the news and I'm saying, you know, I don't want to push people and come across as being unsympathetic around what's going on, but all of the programs that people are talking about are funded based on census data. The conversation, even around the fact of whether or not, you know, there was a dilemma as to whether or not to close the schools, and people were upset. And one of the things that was said is that these might be the only 2 meals children receive. Yep. National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, funded by census data. This is where we get it from. So we're not here just saying, fill out the census, ignore COVID. We understand what's going on with COVID, but we also know that the remedy is knowing who is in need in our communities. The kids that need those lunches, the kids that need that breakfast in school, funded through census data, our healthcare census, our hospitals, unemployment insurance. You can look all of this up. You don't want to trust the Census Bureau? Look it up yourself. It's all, the information is out there for you.
Well, I tell you, we could really be on this conversation all night, but I know that we are winding down, and there were 2 questions that we did receive, and then Natasha is going to close us out with some final words and a call to action.
That's great.
And yes.
There was another question too that I put in the chat.
Okay, so let me look at all 3 questions. The first one is, with ICE raids hitting heavily in areas such as Sunset Park in Brooklyn, how do we persuade residents who are apprehensive about deportation to participate in the census?
I think that really goes back to what Nikki said earlier. So with Nick, she works for the Census Bureau. And before she can be hired for that position, she has to take an oath that she will maintain the confidentiality of that material, of the individual data. And that material is kept confidential for the next 72 years. And if anyone at the Census Bureau were to give over anyone's individual personal data, they are literally facing a $250,000 fine and 5 years in the feds, in the federal penitentiary. So the people need to understand how this information is garnered, how it is protected. And let us be clear, if ICE is coming to get you, they're not coming to get you based on census data. If you have a cell phone, when you get on that, if you get on a plane in New York and you get off the plane in Virginia, your weather's going to update. The location for your GPS is going to update. If you go to California, your time is going to update. You have a cell phone, you're on social media. If the man was trying to get you, they got plenty of ways to get you. They are not going to be able to use census data for that purpose, but people don't know that. That's why we have to be able to educate them about that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. The next question is, when we complete our census form, should we include those who reside in our household who are incarcerated in our count? So I'll say that again. When we complete our census form, should we include those who reside in our household who are incarcerated in our count?
So the answer is no. Those who are incarcerated are actually counted in a separate group quarters operation. So we will be counting those who are incarcerated separately. We'll get that information directly from the prison or the jail where they are housed.
I do want to add that one thing that we have in New York that a lot of other states don't have is that on the state level, the population for people who are criminally justice involved and who are incarcerated gets attributed back to the communities from which they came. That's a state designation. It's very specific to New York. It's an anti-prison gerrymandering mandate that went into effect via a referendum, a vote that was taken here by the citizens of the state of New York. So if you are living in a state that still engages in wholesale prison gerrymandering, that's something that you should be fighting for, to make sure that the resources and the benefits of the count of those people who are incarcerated does not go to the upstate prisons, does not go to the white communities where many of these prisons are housed, that it is then attributed back to the communities from which those brothers and sisters came.
Awesome. Thank you. These are great questions. So thank you for asking the questions. And if any of the questions come up for you later on that we don't see, then definitely we'll make sure that we get back to you. We're going to share this out more broadly on our individual social media pages, on the New York City Black Women's Political Club page, on Natasha's page. So we're really going to make sure, because this was a great overview with 3 different layers of information from Nicole, from Melva, and from Lurie. So we want to make sure that while we're home sheltering in, that you start watch parties. When you share it, I'm going to start a watch party later for those who might have missed this, and let them watch. They don't want to, I mean, we could take this really on the road, ladies. We need to get a contract, because clearly the humor and the passion for the work is because everyone enjoys what they're doing. And I love being the one to bring the conversation together. We're all in our lane, using what we have as our superpowers as Black women to make all queens count. So it's important that you stay connected to each one of them. And I want them all to share their social media handles before we introduce Natasha. But there was an ask about, visuals that we could use. I think, Lurie, you explained that you were going to share some of yours. I think, Melva, you have some pieces as well that you'll be sharing. I think, Nicole, because everything is going digital, there will be some quick visual aids to help you share on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm not on TikTok. My kids forbid me from going on TikTok.
We have some.
And we have some visuals from the New York City Black Women's Political Club that will be shared as well. So just make sure that you're in the conversation. In addition to all the other things that we're dealing with, we're managing emotions around how this global pandemic is changing lives minute by minute. Let's also remember that we can't lose sight of what we can control, and that's clicking on the census and filling it out and making sure that we have our numbers represented. So real quick, ladies, before Natasha closes us out, can you share your social media so that those who have called into the line, they can jot that down and they can stay in contact with you as well? Nicole, we'll start with you.
Oh, I was going to say, so I'm here on my work capacity. So you're going to get at U.S. Census Bureau on all social media platforms. So that's where we are as a Census Bureau. But I just wanted to add one thing, because I feel like we touched on it, but we didn't break it down the way we should. And that's how political representation is tied to census data. So Article 1, Section 2 states that we do account of the population for the purposes of apportionment. So this is how every state receives its share of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives. So that's the stated constitutional purpose. But next year, we are also going to go through the redistricting process. So our representation on a city, state, and federal level depends on census data. So that's also why this is critically important that we do this now, because the funding formula and the representation in government will be the same for the next 10 years. We will not have another opportunity to redo the census to make any adjustments until 2030. So it's still imperative, again, with the global pandemic going on, that we still make sure that we complete the census.
Thank you,
And
Nicole.
what she just said is so vitally important. Nikki, I thank you so much for always making sure we get to all the points. Let's go back to Wakandaville, that community of 100 families. If according to the census formula, communities of 100 families are supposed to get 10 political representatives, but only 40 of those families fill out the census, that means Wakandaville only gets 4 political representatives. So when we are fighting bail reform, we're fighting to keep hospitals and to keep healthcare facilities open. We're fighting to stop and frisk. We literally are 6 votes short of what we should have whenever we go to Albany, when we go to city council, when we go to our local elected official spaces. So if we don't even have the votes that we are rightfully entitled to, and we don't have the money that we are rightfully entitled to, we ain't got no money, we ain't got no power, and we ain't got no respect. And for everybody from Gen X who understands money, power, and respect, let us be clear what that means. Thank you for that, Nikki.
And also too, I mean, point of fact, right? We got to drive it home, right? So we know New York State has lost at least 1 congressional seat every decennial census since 1940. We've lost 2 seats in 2000. We lost 2 more seats in 2010, and we're poised to lose another 2 seats. And as Nikki and Larry just stated, we can't afford it. We can't afford to lose that political representation in Washington, someone fighting for us, especially in the time that we're in now. So we can't lose that political representation. We just can't afford it.
Awesome. So Melva, why don't you go ahead and give your social media connect? We'll jump back to Lurie, and then we'll bring Natasha back to close this out.
Sure. I'm here under my Abney wing, and for both Twitter and for IG, it is at Abney, ABNY, Census 2020. Those are my 2 handles on both Twitter and Instagram. Awesome.
Thank you, Melva. And Lurie, back to you for your social media connects.
So for the Center for Law and Social Justice, you can hit us at CLSJ_MEC. That's CLSJ_MEC, because we are one of the institutions at the phenomenal Medgar Evers College at the City University of New York. If you want to get at me personally, that's Afro State of Mind everywhere. One word, Afro State of Mind.
Afro State of Mind, we love it. And ladies, again, thank you for your time tonight, your information, and just your brilliance as Black women. You know, Black Girl Magic is real. We do run the world, and we're going to make sure that all queens get counted, and all of our brothers too. So we're going to turn it over to you, Natasha, the brainchild behind this New York City Black Women Political Club. We appreciate the platform that you have provided for us to have these engaging and important conversations in such a time as this. So we'll let you close it out.
Dr. Grant always loves to give people the light, and she knows I like try to hide from the light. I'm like, no, it's not about me. It's about the people. So thank you so much to this wonderful panel of experts. I agree. If I could get a contract and if I had millions and millions of dollars, I would love to repay you all for all your hard work, because this is hard work. And I know everyone is doing this because we love the people, but this is hard work. And I feel the passion when you all speak. I know that I am inspired every single time after we do this. And I always feel like if one person just hears, you know, what you guys have to say, perhaps that'll encourage them to fill out the census themselves, or to tell their friends or their families about the census and the importance of filling out the census. because I think information is power. And still to this very day, people are still confused about the census. People still don't, have an understanding of why it's so important to fill out the census. And so wanting to sort of shift gears and figure out ways for us to still disseminate this information in a way. And I think Melva said it feels like she's home and she's having a conversation. And that was actually the purpose of the Count All Queens series, right? We wanted people to feel comfortable. We wanted to have it at a bar or a restaurant, so people can really relax and feel comfortable and open to discussion. And so thank you all so very much. We are still trying to navigate this virtual world we're living in. I encourage everyone to please stay connected to us. We certainly want to send out information and connect folks to Census or ADNI or the Center for Law and Justice. I'm messing it up. Help me out.
Social justice.
Social justice. It ain't just
Social justice.
Social
Mega Evers. Come on, Mega Evers. We definitely want to connect people to these resources and make sure that we're disseminating information. And I thank you to the participants that logged on. I see Farine, who was our wonderful host when we did our Harlem event, doing amazing things in Harlem. And just thank you all so much. I should give you our social accounts. New York City Black Women's Political Club on Facebook, NYC BWPC on Instagram, and our webpage is www.nycbwpc.com. You can sign up to join our listserv after this call. Shortly after, we'll send out some resources from the wonderful panelists here so you have that information. And last but not least, please go online and fill out the census. That's the whole purpose of why we're here. So thank you so much, and thank you to all that joined. And Max joined us, so if you are on video, Max is
Hi, Max.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, and
thank you
spread the
again.
word. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
guys.
and
Thank you.
thank you all again. And while we're loving on each other and telling each other thank you, we're going to type in the census address once again. Count all queens. Let's make it happen. Jamila, thank you. And the rest of the support team who's been here. It's been a pleasure. Ladies, love you all. There's nothing you can do about it. Continue to shine and let's get the word out. We will make history in 2020. God bless, and we're
That's
praying
right.
for all of you to stay safe, stay well during this pandemic. We know that it is ravaging New York, so let's just keep one another covered and lifted in prayer. Some of you who might not believe in prayer, you might want to reconsider that during this time. I'm just saying. But anyway, that's me. I got to go. Y'all pray for me. Appreciate you, and we'll be back with more information again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.